There we go. All right. I think there'll be a few more people who are straggling getting on, but we're going to go ahead and get started. We got a few things that I want to talk about today that hopefully you guys understand or at least can learn something today, because I've seen some problems and errors and questions coming up about these things. So I'm going to share my screen with you. But before I start, is there any questions or anything specific you guys want to talk about or have questions about today? Okay, I will take that as no. If you do, let's talk about it on the call. Okay, so I'm going to share a graphic with you real quick. Okay, this graphic right here was created whenever we have a challenge or question or something that's happening in a transaction. The first question I always like to ask is, who do we represent and who is the problem between? And so we created this graphic here, and I want you to look at this as these are the people that are involved in a transaction and the different contracts that we deal with. If you look at the top left corner, you see the seller. So we have a seller, the seller's agent, and what links the two of those together is exclusive right to sell agreement. So that's what's going to link them. In the coming months, that's not going to change because we're still going to represent sellers. So that has nothing to do with the changes that are going to happen in August that we've talked about multiple times. The exclusive right to sell. Now, with the buyer, you got the buyer and the exclusive buyer broker agreement and the agent. Those are the two that link those two together. That's how we establish agency with our buyers. Now, there's going to be some changes with that we'll talk about more as we get closer to it, but that still links us there. When you have a buyer and a seller, the only contract that links those two people is the REPC. That's the only way that those two are being linked. Now, the seller's agent and the buyer's agent, the thing that links them is the MLS. This is the section that's going to be eliminated from our contracts, as this MLS will not link the seller's agent and the buyer's agent. So I want to show you, so keep this graphic in mind, but I want to show you a couple things when it comes to how we're dealing with commission and how we are dealing with making sure you guys get paid. So I'm going to share, let's see, this one right here. Okay, so the first thing is this escrow instructions. I personally think this escrow instructions will probably go away once we eliminate the MLS from it, but it still can be used for brokerage commissions. So this right here is talking about commissions to the brokerage commission agreement. This is to be used for payment of commissions. I've seen agents using this to just notify title company of stuff. It's specifically designed for brokerage-based commissions. It's saying the seller's brokerage and the buyer's brokerage authorize escrow office to disperse the payment of commissions directly to the buyer's brokerage as follows. So this is the amount that you're going to have. We had one this week that the amount here was $500. And what the agent was trying to do is they were trying to give $500 to their client at closing to help with like a home warranty. When in reality, what they were having us sign was we're giving up the 3% commission and asking for $500 instead. So you can see how that was an error that the agent made, but they were thinking, oh, if I put it here, $500, and then in additional terms, $500 to be credited to the buyer for their home warranty, that would cover it. The problem is they put it in this section right here that said seller's brokerage to only pay $500, and then they had their broker sign it, and then they tried to have us sign it. Obviously, we saw that and didn't sign it, and they were able to change that to the amount they were going to get there for that. So you want to be really careful. This is dealing with the commission between the brokerages. So if you get to the point in August 17th, where there is no longer a commission that's being paid on the MLS. So we don't see any MLS commission. We have to figure out how we're getting paid. There's really three ways we can still get paid. It's the same ways as we have now, but now we have to make sure we are not protected by the MLS. So we have to make sure that we're doing the right forms. So let's say that after August 17th, MLS removes the commission from that. We don't have any commission there. The first question we have to ask ourselves is, who's going to pay the commission? So if my buyer is going to pay the commission, then if you go back to this agreement that we had, that I showed you on here, if you go to this, if my buyer is paying the commission to me, where does all of that information get put? If you're looking at this form, what contract am I going to use if my buyer is going to pay me directly?
Buyer broker.
Buyer broker agreement, right? Thanks. So if I'm going to make any changes there, let's say that, so the settlement's telling us that we have to get whatever amount we put in there, we have to get. So if I put 3% in there, and they're only going to pay me 2.5%, I have to do an addendum to my buyer broker to make sure that I get the right amount there. Or let's say that I put, 2% in there and they're going to pay me 3%. I need to actually put that in the buyer broker agreement to get that fixed. So if we go back to this real estate escrow instructions. So option number one, buyer is going to pay me. Option number two, the seller's brokerage wants to pay me. If the seller's brokerage wants to pay me, I'm going to use this escrow instruction still. I'm going to have them put that in there and they're going to agree to pay for it. Now, that's option number two. Option number three is the seller pays for it. Okay, if the seller pays for it, then there's nothing that links the buyer's agent to the seller. So we have to go through the REPC, but it has to be through this seller's payment of buyer broker's fee. Seller agrees to pay whatever amount of the purchase price to the buyer's brokerage. This payment shall be made in addition to any other compensation offered by the seller's brokerage or the buyer's brokerage. So if there is compensation offered by the brokerage, the seller's brokerage, this is in addition to that. So let's just say that there is no commission paid by the buyer, the brokerage. Then you need to put the full amount in this line right here that says, this is what I'm going to get paid from the seller, and the seller agrees to pay that. So that's how you get it into the contract if you're going to get paid. So there's three ways to get paid. Buyer's paying it, that's the buyer broker agreement. Seller's brokerage is paying it, that's the escrow instructions. And the seller directly is going to pay it, is going to go in this. So you're going to want to use this verbiage here to do that. Any questions on how you're going to get paid here in the next by August 17th when it removes from the MLS? The biggest key is when it's not on the MLS, there's no protection from the MLS. So if you don't have a buyer broker agreement signed and you've been showing your client homes and they go to an open house and write an offer, you're not getting protected by that anymore. So you have to have your buyer broker agreements in place and then put this in the contract if you're not having your client pay for it. Okay, any questions on how to get paid moving forward?
So I do just want to make a clarification, if that's okay.
Yep.
When we write the offer and send it over to the listing agent, then we're going to include whichever form we're going to use, either the buyer broker, the commission agreement, or this real estate brokerage payment addendum. And that will go with the offer.
Yeah, you need, because there's no guaranteed compensation right now. It's almost like you're doing a for sale by owner. If you don't get something in writing by the for sale by owner that you're getting paid, then your client's going to be required to pay you. So in this particular case, let's say I don't send this over with the offer, and then I realize that, oh, I got to make sure I get paid. So I send this over to the seller's brokerage. They won't pay it because they decided they're not going to pay it. And then we put it in the contract and the seller says, I'm not going to pay it. Well, now the only way you're getting paid is through the buyer broker agreement. And so then now you've got to enforce the buyer broker agreement on your client who's under contract with a seller on their home because they didn't agree to put that in the contract. So, yes.
So is
can I
that the best way?
go ahead, Jeanette?
You can go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask also, because in the past we've had to be very careful about how we talk about commission. And so with this last one, it sounds like we're asking, is it our buyers who are asking for the sellers to pay our commissions? I just want to figure out how we are talking about that to another agent.
Yeah.
Or
So
if we're sending something over, with an offer.
yeah, that's a great question. So let me go back to this diagram here. So what the problem that we've had in the past is we have had a buyer's agent over here in the right bottom corner, buyer's agent directly asking the seller to pay their commission. So there's no contract that goes between these two people. There's not a contract between the buyer's agent and the seller. There's nothing to do an addendum. There's nothing. So if I wrote in my contract, seller to pay the buyer's agent commission of blank, I'm now negotiating a buyer's agent commission with a seller, which is that's not the right way to do it. So what we need to do is we only have two options to negotiate the commission. Okay, option number one, buyer's agent to buyer. Okay, so I've asked for a 3% commission. My buyer has signed a buyer broker agreement with 3% commission. That's our obligation. Now, if they don't want to pay it, then they can go to the seller through the REPC and ask for that amount to be paid to the buyer's agent. So it's the buyer asking the seller to pay the buyer's agent. So they're purposely going from the seller to them down to us in that direction. The only other way to do it is the buyer's agent going through the seller's agent. Well, that MLS and the compensation is going to be eliminated. So I can't go through the seller and demand that the seller's agent pay me anymore. So I have to just go through the buyer, if that makes sense. Was that more clear?
Yes. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions on getting paid? I know it's a fun topic to go through. So I want to cover one more thing today, and then I'll open it up to any questions that we have.
Well, before we leave that,
Uh-huh.
will title then be enforcing the buyer broker?
Well, so when you say enforcing it, so title doesn't enforce anything. Title just puts things on there.
Right. I'm sorry. Will they be cognizant of the buyer broker agreement and then adding that to what the buyers need to bring in to close?
Yeah, and I would say it's our responsibility as agents to make sure that the title gets a copy of the buyer broker agreement so that they can see that. So anytime they have an agreement between the parties, they can put it on the CDs, they can put it on all the title documents so you can get protected. We see that happen a lot with the 295 fee where it's in the buyer broker agreement, but the agent doesn't send the buyer broker agreement to the title. They don't put it on the CD. Nobody looks for it. And then after it's all closed, they go, oh, I forgot to collect that. Well, whose fault is that? The agent wants to blame the title company for not putting it on there, but the agent's responsible for making sure that their costs and their expenses are right. Our job as an agent is to review the title report, or not the title, well, title report, yes, but the closing documents to make sure it's all correct. So yes, Michael, that's exactly what we need to do is make sure they get the buyer broker agreement and make sure that fee is put on there. And depending on who's actually paying it will depend on where it goes in the CD. That
Just
help?
just to make a comment though, like when you're the buyer's agent, the title company doesn't always send the seller side, which is where the commission would be, if we're asking them, to us to review. So now we're gonna have to ask them. They used to send us both and then they started only sending one. I don't know if that was some legal change, but now we need to make sure that we get both sides.
Yeah, I would just verify where it is. So if you don't see it on the documents you have, that's where the question comes to, where I would be asking title company, hey, where is my commission at? And do you have that on the CD to make sure that it's covered? So if the seller's paying it and you don't see it on you only see the buyer's CD side of it, you're not seeing the seller's, then I would talk with the title company for it. I've seen title companies put that fee on there on the buyer's CD with the from the seller's side of it. So you can definitely do that, but I just verify it. I don't think that there's anything wrong with trusting what people are doing, but verifying that they're doing it correctly. It's going to protect you through the whole process. It's not that I don't think you're going to do it right. It's that I've seen it done wrong so many times. I just want to make sure I get paid and I don't have to wait for it. So I would just verify it. If I don't see it, verify it. Okay, any other questions on that? Okay, I have one more thing I want to go through today. And this stems from a problem that I just talked to someone today about. It's the time clause and the backup addendums. So we're really going to talk about backup addendums, but I want to address the time clause just real quick and then jump into the backup addendums. Because what we don't want to do is put our sellers in a position where they have two offers accepted and none of them are in backup. They're both in primary position and one of them's going to be not very happy. So I'm going to show this contract. Okay, so I'm going to start out with this option to keep property on the market, the time clause option, but we're just going to fly through this one. We'll talk about the time clause more in depth another time because I want to get to the backup offer. But let's say that you represent a seller and your seller wants to, you've accepted an offer that they have to sell a home. And so because they have to sell a home, you want to keep marketing the property. And if another offer comes in that doesn't have to sell a home or has better terms and conditions of the offer, then you want to be able to move these guys out and have another offer. That's the whole purpose of the time clauses, so you can continue marketing the property. When you put a home under a time clause, let's now say that you get an offer that comes in. So today I got an offer from one agent and I liked it, so I put it under contract with this time clause. 5 days goes down the road and another offer comes in that I like more. Okay, I'm going to actually accept that offer with a backup addendum section. So you don't accept it, you counter it with these backup addendums here. This is going to put them in a backup position. Now, the question I get a lot.
I'm sorry, who's in the backup position, the first offer or the second?
Okay, so great question. Let me clarify that. Okay, so offer number one, you accept and you put it in as a time clause. You put a time clause on their contract. So offer number one is accepted. They're working through it. They're trying to sell their home. 5 days later, offer number two comes in. I like offer number two. I want to actually take that offer. So I'm going to counter offer two with a backup contract addendum. So offer number two is going to go into a backup position. They're going to go into a backup position behind offer number one, and they're going to wait for a notification. So the question I get on this a lot is, well, I don't want to be in backup position. I just want them to be booted out. Well, you can't just kick offer number one out. You have to give them an opportunity to remove their conditions based on this time clause. But we're dealing more with this backup offer. So this offer number 2, we're going to put into a backup position. I don't want to go and just accept the offer as is, because that's what the problem we've created for this agent today was. They have a primary offer, offer number 1, and then they accepted offer number 2 because they thought we could accept that offer and put them in position to buy it. But they're now in primary position and another primary position, which is not possible. So we have a scenario where the seller could very well be in default with offer number 2 because they accepted it without putting it in a backup position. So I'm going to put it in a backup position. This backup position has all the deadlines and dates and everything that you need to protect your clients, both on the buying side and the selling side. Everything starts once they go into primary position, and nothing starts until that happens. So I'm going to put it in backup position. Now, once I put them in backup position, I'm the listing agent, and I've got buyer number 1 who's under contract with me, and I got buyer number 2 who is in backup position with me. Now, as a listing agent, my next step is I want to notify the buyer. This is buyer number 1. I want to notify them of an accepted offer. Okay, so I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to say, buyer number 1, I got an offer that I've accepted, and I want to activate this time clause. So I've activated the time clause. Buyer has a choice. They can do one of 2 things. One, they can remove their time clause and move forward. Okay, if they remove their conditions and they move forward, your seller is stuck with offer number 1. It's in the buyer's hands of whether they want to remove those conditions. If they remove those conditions, then you're stuck with offer number 1. If they choose not to do that, if they choose to cancel it, then you can move into offer number 2. So in this particular case, seller notifies buyer. The notification starts the timer for the time clause. Once it expires, you're going to have one of 2 things from the buyer. The buyer's notice to the seller of removal of conditions. So the buyer is now going to, this is buyer number 1, is going to give a removal of these conditions. They're going to say, this is where it's contains in our contract, and the buyer is removing those conditions and moving forward. So if they get this, they're going to be moving forward. You're sticking with buyer number 1. If they don't give you this, then based off of right here, notice to buyer, I want to read this real quick. Number 3, buyers advised that upon receipt of the seller's notice, buyers shall remove the applicable conditions from the REPC in writing within the agreed upon time, or by failing to respond in writing to the seller's notice, allow the REPC to be automatically become canceled, in which instance the earnest money deposits or deposits shall be released to the buyer. So the seller is giving this notice to the buyer. The buyer can give this notice back because it has to be in writing. Right here, it says twice in writing, or in writing. It has to be in writing. They're giving response that they're going to remove those conditions. If the buyer chooses not to respond in the deadline, it's automatically canceled. Now, if it's automatically canceled, the seller now wants to accept offer number 2, seller's notice to backup buyer of termination of primary offer. So it says right here, addendum this of the REPC is a secondary backup position. So whatever addendum you put here at the very top, whoops, not that one, this one, whatever addendum that is in your contract is going to be put here. Addendum number, the REPC is a secondary backup offer. Based on terms of section 1.4 of the backup addendum and by seller's notice, seller is given written notice to the buyer that the primary contract has been terminated, and buyer is advised that the buyer's backup contract with seller is now primary offer. So now I have the backup offer over here, just waiting in the wind. I get a notification that this offer number 1 has canceled or didn't respond, so automatically canceled. Now, I, as a seller's agent, will send this, which will notify the backup offer, offer number 2 is now primary offer, and then you're gonna proceed just as a normal contract. Okay, any questions on how we're dealing with
And
that?
that transition for the backup offer then is automatic. They don't have to re-accept or anything like that.
No, it's automatic as long as your seller gives written notice. So that's what this one is right here. So your seller needs to give them this notice that they are now in primary, and that buyer doesn't need to do anything other than now they have, now those contract dates. So if you go back to this addendum for the buyer, termination of primary contract. If the primary contract is canceled or withdrawn, seller within 4 days after such event provide buyer with written notice of such termination, except as provided in section 1.3, buyer's receipt of notification. This backup shall become the primary contract. So this is already in the contract. So the new buyer, buyer number 2, doesn't have to acknowledge it or do anything or sign anything. They're just now automatically in there, and these terms start, the contract deadlines now start.
So what I normally do is then do an addendum to clarify all of those dates. Isn't that good? So there's no gray area?
So you're doing an addendum that says what the specific dates are?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't see anything wrong with that. I think everyone being on the same page. I know agents who have not figured out how to count contract dates. Like if I have a date that starts today, is today the first day or is tomorrow the first day? Anytime there's confusion with that, even though it is laid out in the contract, so it does start tomorrow as the first day. There's never anything wrong with doing an addendum and clarifying so that everybody's on the same page.
So let's talk about that. If it says seller's disclosure deadline, 3 days from the buyer's receipt of the seller's notice, you
Yep.
give the seller's notice on the 1st. Does that start the first day or does it start the next day?
So the first day is the next day. So let's run
Okay.
through the scenario for today. Let's say I gave you notice today. And you have 3 days to give to do this. So 3 days, and I gave you notice today. So day number 1 starts tomorrow.
Saturday, Sunday,
Saturday,
Monday's date.
Sunday, Monday's the 3rd day. So
And
that's what
even
that
if
day
even if you screw that up and you put a different date and your buyer signs it, that is the date.
Yeah, so if you,
Okay.
if you send an addendum over and you said, sellers disclose, just to clarify dates, sellers disclosures to be July 2nd, then you just changed it to July 2nd.
Perfect. I just always think no gray area is the best. And if they sign it, then that's what we're going with.
Yeah. Yep.
I have a question,
Anytime
Jason.
you do a counter and you change the dates, it doesn't matter what these ones do because every one of these addendums will say this at the very end. All other terms of the reps, including all prior addendum counteroffer to be modified. So everything's modified based off of whatever your new addendum is. But that's why you do this addendum so that there's some protection on both sides. So when you do go into primary, because you don't know when the primary offer is going to cancel, you don't want to get yourself in a position where, you know, let's say that the primary offer cancels yesterday, they give you notice today, and you as an agent are going on vacation for the next 5 days, and all these deadlines are going to be screwed up because now you're on vacation. So you just want to be really careful with making sure, just make sure this backup addendum's put in there. And that was the problem we ran into today, is the backup addendum was not used. So now I have a primary offer number 1 who's accepted and is now in a time clause. So they've got 3 days that they put on the contract to cancel or proceed. The second offer came in and they didn't put the backup offer, they just accepted it. So now I got another primary offer that's accepted. So now I'm creating a scenario where I have 2 people that have contracts on a property, and we can't do that. So in this case for our agent, we're hoping that by tomorrow, when the time clause addendum ends, we're hoping that that client, offer number one, backs out. If they decide not to back out, we've got a problem. But as of right now, we're just kind of hoping that offer number one backs out, then offer number two will come in. They're already in position, so I want you guys to avoid that by using this backup addendum.
Perfect.
I
I
have
have
a-
one other question. When it comes to backup offers,
Uh-huh.
anyone can write that. So typically it would come from the buyer's agent. So if you have a primary offer and someone says, oh, well, we want to write a backup offer, it should come from the buyer's agent. Because I have sometimes buyer's agent, oh yeah, can you send us a backup offer? And I'm thinking, well, no, you're the one that wants to go into backup. You should write it. Is that not correct?
Yeah, it can go from anyone, but what they should have done is when they knew they were in a time clause, they should have just suggested to the new buyer number two's agent, put the backup addendum, include it in your contract because it's part of it. What agents don't want to do is they're not understanding what this backup addendum is doing. And they're like, well, we don't want to be in backup position. We want to be in primary position. We want you to move out the first one because of their conditions, and we want to be primary. So I don't want to be in backup position. Well, the backup position protects everybody, and you can sign the backup position and the very next day switch it into primary position. So yeah, it can go from anybody, but I would say that it should really come from the buyer because they're the ones that wanting to be put in that position.
I have a question, Jason.
Uh-huh.
So going back to your scenario of the primary that has the time clause, and they say, okay, you've given us notice, so you accepted another offer. We're just going to remove our contingency. Do they have to provide any kind of evidence that they can move forward? We used to have to use that language of, and this is notice and provide evidence that you can perform, or can they just say, we remove our contingency?
Yeah, so the biggest question on that one is they've always said, okay, well, I'm just going to remove my contingency on the house, so I don't have to sell my house, and then I'm going to go through, and then if I can't sell my house, I'm just going to default. The biggest problem that's creating for the buyer is, let's say that they could not buy the house and they remove those contingencies, they're going to be in default of the contract. If they're in default of the contract, we have three options, and everyone likes to go to one option, and that option is the earnest money. Oh, I'll just lose the earnest money if I can't do it. But there's still two other options, and so as an agent, putting them in a position that says, yeah, let's just remove our contingencies, you're not doing your client the service, because if they don't do it, the seller could actually go after the buyer for defaulting. And I can tell you that if a new offer came in that was going to net them more money, it would be in their best interest to go back to the buyer and say, hey, there's some damages you've caused by defaulting on this and not being able to go through with it. So you're kind of going into an ethical realm of, should they do that? No, they should not do that. Do they need to send proof? We don't have anything in our contract that says you have to send proof that they have to do it. But what they're saying is, we're removing the contingencies because we don't need that anymore. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but if I'm representing a seller, my obligation, I feel, is to give them, because who wants to go down that path of suing somebody if they default? I want evidence either from the lender or something that they can move forward with not selling that house.
So
Because
Jason,
I can't trust the other agent to school their buyer of they won't just lose their earnest money, they could actually be sued for the difference. I can't trust that. I have to advise my seller, yeah, they're going to remove it, but we would like some evidence. So that's where my
I
brain
think
goes.
she's just asking if you can ask the buyer to provide a letter from their loan officer verifying that they don't need the funds from their sale of their house to move forward.
Yeah, you can definitely ask that. Russ, you want to chime in on
so
that?
scroll up to your time clause addendum. So if you look there in section 1B under the financing and if applicable, subject to the sale of buyer's property condition, if you've checked that, meaning that they have to remove the subject to the sale, they are also giving up their financing condition at the same time. So I don't know if that helps answer the question, but it's not just removing the subject to the sale of their property. They're also because of checking that box, they're also removing the financing. So they don't have the option to go to back and say we get the earnest money based on 8.3 because of that cancellation. So it still doesn't say that they have to have proof, but they are giving all that up. So I think the key is just making sure you have enough money in 8.3B where, if they cancel after due diligence, or, well, I guess regardless, just enough earnest money that if they do cancel, you're protected for your client.
And then Amy, based on what you're saying is, yeah, you can ask for whatever you want from them. The challenge is if there's nothing in your contract that says they're required to do that, that's where you run that risk. So yes, there is risk. And so Lisa, when you're saying, should I advise I can advise them of that process, and nobody wants to go through that process. That's true. Nobody does want to go through the process, but we also have to look at it as if they are proceeding and they can't do it, we only have 3 options we can really do as a seller, regardless of any part of the contract. We only have 3 options that we can do. So that puts them in a really bad position. Yes, you don't necessarily want to advise your client that they're going to have to go after them to get compensation. We don't want to be taking advantage of that. But as far as, demanding that, hey, let's say that they come back and they say, we're removing our conditions and we can't buy the home. Well, now we're not in a position where we can say, well, you can't buy the home, so you're out of this scenario. So it does create a little bit of a problem with that if they're not being honest with it. But that's where that other remedy comes in, saying, hey, it's okay if you're going to take advantage of me, then these are what I can do. And that's really how we protect the client.
I have a question. When you market, the home for the seller and you see the TC on the MLS, have you found in general that, buyer's agents kind of look at that like, I don't want to get involved in that? Is that kind of a negative versus a positive sometimes, or more positive?
Like you're saying, if you're a second buyer and you see it on the MLS and you want to go look at it, like, is it a good thing to see it? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, does that kind of sour it a little bit, as a listing agent? And your seller wants to do this. I don't know. So then you see TC and you're kind of like, I don't want it to get messy.
Well, it doesn't have to get messy, and that's why I think we hopefully we went through this well enough that it doesn't have to be messy, and it can be really, really an easy process. I mean, it's no different. Like for me, if I had a buyer that wanted to go look at a time clause and they were really serious about it, they really liked the property, I would have no problem putting a contract in, because I'm probably not competing with another offer other than the one that's already there. And if my offer is good enough to push them out, then they might do that. The longer it's been on a time clause, the less likely the seller's going to want to rock the boat. If they're saying, hey, we're going to close on this house next week and everything's going to go through, they don't have to, just because there's an offer comes in, the listing agent doesn't have to activate the time clause. They don't have to give notice to the buyer that there's another offer in there. They can stick with the buyer for as long as they need to, and then notify them, and they have 4 days to notify them after that.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Any other thoughts? I wish I had a better answer for you, Lisa, on that one. You definitely want to make sure that everybody's doing the right thing, but if they remove those conditions, they just now open themselves up for a lot more liability than they were probably hoping for. But that's,
I've had it work. I've had it work both ways, right? And it seems to come down to the conversation with the listing agent, right? If they have any doubt, or if I can build any doubt in their mind about that other offer, you know, and hey, what would it take for us to knock them out? And I've been surprised.
you know. Okay, well, hopefully that helped for you guys. I think we'll get in a position, you know, if the interest rates drop a little bit, you're gonna see backup offers, you're gonna see multiple offers, you know, in August 17th, when they remove the commission, we're gonna have to be more diligent and figure out where we're getting paid and how we're getting paid. You want to make sure you have a plan up front, because nothing's worse than showing up to the title company, realizing nobody's going to pay you. So, okay, any other questions?
Yeah, Jason, I have a question.
Sure.
Going back to the commission, beginning August 17th, can the listing agent put the seller's commission on the description of the public or private remarks?
I don't think they can do that yet. They're trying to avoid any appearance of commission whatsoever on the MLS. So what people are thinking is, oh, we'll put it in the comments or something like that. The whole reason that it's coming off the MLS is because the MLS wants to completely distance themselves from any conversation with commission whatsoever. They're basically trying to protect themselves, so they don't have to be part of any of the lawsuits or any of the problems that's going on. So I would, I think we'll have more clarification as we move through it from the MLS, but I don't think you can put anything on the MLS.
Yeah.
Okay, hopefully that helped for you guys. As always, reach out if you have any questions.
Thank
Have a
you.
great weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.